All right, everyone. So I just got done watching episode 3 of WWE Unreal titled Worth the Wait. Now, this one was focused on the women's division. So we had everything from Charlotte Flair to start it off to Bianca Belair at the end. And it's really one of those things that watching this, it really kind of sinks into your head just how deep the women's division is. You know, obviously WWE as a whole right now is super, super deep. I mean, you have really talented stars that aren't even in the main event because there are so many main event caliber superstars that are currently in the business. And the women's division is a perfect example of that. I mean, you have just a deep, deep bench of superstars that all deserve main event shots. And so I love this episode how we go from kind of the recovery of Charlotte Flair, the journey that it took for her to get into the Royal Rumble, and kind of how all of the reaction came about. Of course, you have Chelsea Green, and her road to the championship, and how she had invited her family, her friends, and then she finds out actually you're not competing on this show tonight. Only, right, go from this kind of low to find out that she's going to be competing at Saturday Night Main Event for a championship. So you kind of get this, back and forth, but in the end, everything works out. And seeing how they're, a little bit nervous before the matches, seeing how everything comes together and how kind of close knit a lot of these female superstars are. It really was, a great, great episode. And like I said, it one thing you don't get on the screen because you're seeing their characters so often is kind of what leads up to these great moments. All of the kind of lows that have to be hit and how they overcome all of that. And obviously, you didn't really get much of Rhea Ripley or anything like that in this episode just because she was focused on another. So to get other superstars, to get a look at kind of how Chelsea Green, her feelings on this, more than just the character we see on screen, to find out that Bianca Belair makes all of her ring gear. I mean, just one of these really cool things, right? To see how that whole process starts. And then she shows after, one of the biggest matches of her career in the Elimination Chamber that's going to catapult her onto WrestleMania, to see that, during the match something ripped, and it's just like all of these things. And yet to the viewer, we just see a really great product, right? But all of this stuff is going on. And then obviously there was a lot of talk about Jade Cargill, and her return in this and how they told that story. And to see the, like I said, when we're watching it on screen, it's just like, oh my God, that makes sense. That tells you how good it's put together, right? Triple H, hey, get this camera shot, get this camera shot. Him telling Jade, make sure you take your time so that we have the time to set the scene. All of that was done in this. And to see how when she's coming out, you see the Liv Morgan facial expression, right? You see her going, "Oh my God, is she coming for me? Is she going to beat me up?" And by the way, it's believable. Even though Liv Morgan didn't do it, she's being framed for it. So she thinks, "Oh yeah, she's coming for me." Only for her to attack Naomi. Like, just cinema, right? That's the only way you could really put it. Cinema. And then you see what happens after that. And also, Stephanie McMahon is kind of all throughout this episode talking, because you could just tell she's the biggest kind of like, I don't think mentor is the right word, but she's the one behind the scenes that's really always working to make sure that someone like Chelsea Green and others are getting their shots, right? To make sure that they're, getting the storylines that they should. And it's just all of that put together, I think, was so great. But my biggest takeaway was just kind of reaffirming a lot of what I've been saying for quite some time on this channel, which is the depth of the women's division right now is quite shocking. It really is. There are so many talented stars, and it's one of those really good things and also really bad things, because when you do have kind of the depth that you have, you get a lot of people who deserve more, right? You get a lot of people that deserve a lot more, and yet they don't, right? And so hopefully, that's kind of the good problem to have. But great episode, worth the wait. I will say, and I'm going to continue to say this, if they do an Unreal season 2, my guess is they probably will, I don't know, but if they do an Unreal season 2, I'd like to see even more behind the scenes, because the problem is that this is really just kind of a, like, it's no different than a lot of the other docu-series, besides the fact that it's a little more recent, right? Usually you don't get it so recently. I want to see even more about the planning and ideas that were ditched. And maybe they don't want to give away things that could potentially happen in the future, but they kind of hint at, oh yeah, we made this decision with who was going to come, who was going to be responsible for, the attack on Jade Cargill, right? And we painted in a Liv, and then it ended up being Naomi. Fine, but what else? What other ideas were behind that? That I think if you really want to give that type of series, right? That's the way you do it. Because otherwise, this kind of feels more like I said, like the WrestleMania XL documentary, right? Like, is this any really different than that? Not really. So, thank you all for watching, and we'll see you next time.